All right, it is the top of the hour, so let's get started. I want to welcome you to this webinar in which I will share with you the trends impacting doctors' compensation and your ability to engage them in the rest of 2024 and 2025. So you are in the right place if your business success is tied to physician revenue. Now, physician compensation is a complex issue. It's affected by things like the doctor's medical specialty, their practice location, their ownership stake in the practice, their gender and ethnicity. But really today we're going to focus on the payer profile, like who actually pays the doctor? How does the doctor get paid? So you will take away a historic perspective about how doctors have been paid. We'll talk about the impact of Medicare, the Affordable Care Act, and the COVID pandemic. And I will share with you my projections for what maybe the next 18 months might look like for doctors and for you, a person who wants to help doctors translate their high incomes into true wealth. If we've not met before, my name is Dr. Vicki Rackner. I'm a retired surgeon. I've spent the past 15 years helping financial services professionals successfully attract, engage, and serve doctor clients. Now, how does this happen? So here's my story really briefly. I was in a graduate program when I had a surgical emergency myself. I was bleeding internally. By the time the doctors got into my belly, about half of my blood volume was in my pelvis. So I thought it was the end. I was so grateful to wake up that I just knew I was going to be a surgeon, save other people's lives like my own had been saved. So I became a general surgeon and went into private practice in Seattle. I quickly evolved into a breast cancer surgeon. Well, in 2000, I stepped into the role of family caregiver. I took a leave of absence from my practice. And I remember one day a lawyer called and I was folding laundry and he said, would you be willing to look at a case of medical malpractice? I thought anything but another load of laundry. You always hate when you see that kind of x-ray with a surgical instrument in there. So I did this for about 3 years and I got a really good sense of where care went off track. So when I stepped out of my family caregiver role, the question was like, what was I going to do? I could certainly go back to operating, but how many people have been a doctor, patient, family caregiver, and really seen where care went off track? So I decided to do this really wild thing. I was going to start a company helping doctors and patients collaborate more effectively to get better medical care at a lower cost. I thought I was going to kill it. But I struggled and struggled and struggled. I invested about as much as my sales and marketing training as I did in medical school, like literally. So, when financial advisors come to me and they tell me how they've struggled, like I feel their pain. I've been there myself. Well, I went over to Europe to deliver a talk and I went to plug in my laptop. And of course, you can't do that directly because Europe is wired differently than the US. And I thought, that really is my problem. I, as a doctor, am wired differently than these people I'm hoping to write me checks. Well, in Europe, I needed an adapter. So, what if I created an adapter between these two ways of wiring, between the world of business and the world of medicine? And I did, and I got much different results. Like I've been a keynote speaker at national meetings, I've been interviewed on all sorts of shows, I've written a number of books. And I'm not saying that to impress you. What I'm saying is that I struggled before and I did well after. And the only difference was that I really understood my buyer. That is key. So my secret sauce is offering a bridge between the world of business and the world of medicine. This bridge works both ways. So I have two brands. In engaging doctors, I help people like you cross over the bridge to really understand doctors so that you can plug into them. But I also have another brand helping doctors conduct themselves in a more business-minded way so that they can thrive. And, here's what Ed Slott has to say about me.
I'm Ed Slott, and I'm here with Dr. Vicki Rackner, and she just gave the presentation of all presentations. If you're interested in building up your clientele as an advisor with doctors and helping them keep more of their hard-earned money, she can show you how to do it. She brought the house down here. That's all I have to tell you.
And what an honor it was to deliver a keynote for Ed Slott. Okay, so we are going to talk about healthcare. This tends to be a political subject. People come into the conversation with beliefs about how things work. So what I invite you to do is just sort of suspend your ideas and be willing to look at things from a slightly different perspective. I remember growing up, looking at maps and thinking, well, North America, the United States is about the size of Africa. But when you actually go and apply the land masses, you see that our perceptions don't accurately reflect reality. So I just want to invite you to maybe see things a little differently. And since we're talking about a historical perspective, which is the best way to understand how we get to where we are today, let me begin with the story of the day that George Washington died. So he was a fit 72-year-old man. He went on horseback on a little ride, got back and said, Martha, I've got a scratchy throat. So she put him to bed and called the doctors. And the doctors brought their state-of-the-art medical intervention, bleeding and purging. So George Washington, despite these interventions, kept on getting worse. He told them to cut deeper. And they did, but they finally got to the point where they wouldn't cut anymore. So George Washington was actually reported to take the knife to cut himself. Well, there was this one young whippersnapper doctor who had just graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School. And he said, look, I've just heard about this procedure where you make a small hole in the windpipe to help people breathe. And George Washington was really having a hard time breathing. But that was dismissed as state-of-the-art care. And George Washington died that night. Medical historians think that he had strep throat, a weird kind of strep where he formed a pseudomembrane in his windpipe and essentially suffocated. So that young whippersnapper had the idea that probably would have saved George Washington's life, but it was dismissed because that's not what you do. And for a long history, for hundreds of years, we do things in a certain way because that's what we do. If we take a look over time from 1900 on the left to where we are today on the right, what we see is there's all this variability about, how people die, what was the cause of death until about the 1960s, where things sort of stabilized. If you look at any one condition, like the rate, excuse me, at which women die in childbirth, doctors have made a huge difference. So in the 1900s, if you gave birth in the hospital, you had a 1 in 5 chance of dying and your baby dying. But things improved over time. Well, what made the difference? Well, the first is, I know this sounds crazy, but it's hand washing. In the 1900s, doctors used to go to the pathology lab and try to understand the anatomy, why people died. So they would come with these dirty hands. They would wipe their hands on their lab coat and then go and deliver babies. And, of course, women would die of postpartum infections. The doctors put it there in essence. So hand washing made a huge difference. Then there was penicillin. So we have evolved. The practice of medicine has evolved. And as I look back, I see that we've gone through very specific stages, and I'd like to lay these out for you. The first is the era of really what we now recognize as the art of medicine. Back then, and we're talking about like up until the 1930s, there was actually very little that doctors could do to make an impact on the health of their patients. They could remove abscessed teeth, they could lance boils, they could cut off gangrenous limbs. But for the most part, the doctor's real role was to be there and provide comfort. They had a relationship with the patient. They said with their physical presence, I am here. You're not alone. I care about you. And I've got medication to alleviate your suffering. That is the heart of the art of medicine. And people invited doctors into their homes because they found value in that. And if you've ever been ill, you know how important that relationship is. Somebody gets me, somebody's here representing me. All right, back in the early 1900s, doctors charged a nominal fee, whatever it was, and they got paid. Most care was delivered in the home setting, although in the 20s, when we saw people move into the cities, it wasn't as practical to give care at home. So we had hospitals. And the hospitals were very affordable. My dad was hospitalized when he was 2 years old, and the hospital rate was $6.25 a day. So this was something that was manageable for most families. What was unmanageable was the cost of missing wages. So our very first insurance, health related, was actually sickness insurance. Individuals could go and purchase an insurance policy that would replace lost income. So this is really the origin of disability insurance. And then we face something that we have a very new appreciation for. There was the Spanish flu pandemic. It's estimated that more than 100 million people died from that pandemic. That's more people than died in the First and Second World War combined. I have a relative who was telling the story of growing up in New York City during the pandemic, and he left his apartment and he saw the stacks of infant coffins just lining the streets. And, we've all heard about the Spanish flu, but I think the COVID pandemic has really impacted our ability to have a sense of what that was really like for them. In the height of the COVID pandemic, COVID-19 became the third leading cause of death. All right, in the 30s, we enter the era of the blues. So we face the financial blues of the Great Depression. And, FDR was very concerned about this. He wanted to ensure income security for all Americans. So he launched the New Deal, and the Social Security Act was part of that. That was signed into law in 1935. Now, historians tell us that he had actually considered putting a nationalized form of health insurance in place, but a socialized healthcare plan sort of smacked of socialism, smacked of communism, and he thought he would have a really hard time passing it. So that was off the table, at least for them. In the 1930s, we saw employers offering their employees health insurance for hospitals. This was part of the benefits package. So very, very quickly, we had a large portion of the American population who had this employer-sponsored health care. Around that time, technology was exploding. So we're now entering the era of new ways. So we have new ways of delivering healthcare, new ways of paying for healthcare, and new results. And if you just take a look at all of the things that these decades brought, it's pretty amazing. We had a polio outbreak, but now we also had a polio vaccine. We now had insulin, penicillin, chemotherapy. The first cancer patient who was actually saved was saved in 1956. We developed centers for burn care and blood banks in an emergency response. We mastered transplantation. Defibrillation, the ability to shock the heart. With that, suddenly people could live through their heart attacks. So the possibilities exploded. This was a time of prosperity. So the costs exploded too. Now, this is not to say that doctors got it right all the time. I mean, doctors were appearing in cigarette ads. My mom was in a car accident, and her doctor told her to start smoking so she could lose weight and that would help with her back pain. And here is your host with her brother, following in the footsteps of health with her mother. We've got a huge part of the population that's insured, so they have access to health care. But what about other people? What about the poor? What about the elderly? And 7 times Harry Truman made the case for a national health care plan, but there was just too much resistance to it. Really, the first time we see an American political leader offer this idea in a viable way was with JFK. And JFK had this strong belief that rising tide lifts all ships. We would not be strong economically as a nation unless we supported some kind of national access to health care. And on the right, you see him with Eleanor Roosevelt on the anniversary of Social Security being signed into law. But on the other side, there was another really strong voice like Ronald Reagan who said, look, we're a democracy. We can't have socialized insurance. The AMA was strongly opposed to national health care. And, doctors' wives would organize these luncheon events where they would educate their friends about how and why socialized medicine was such a bad idea. I grew up in Minnesota and I had doctor relatives. And we went to visit my aunt who was hospitalized at the Mayo Clinic. And I walked in and I was surprised that the walls weren't pink because for years I had heard about this Pinko organization. At that time, most doctors were in private practice. And, a small percentage of doctors went into academic medicine. But, this idea that there would be this kind of place where doctors were employees, like it was really hard for most physicians to manage. All right, in 1965, we entered the era of Medicare. And if you just take away one thing from this talk, it's this. If you want to put your finger on the pulse of American healthcare, it's set by Medicare. And I'll show you how and why. So in 1965, LBJ signed Medicare into law, and you see Harry Truman there. Harry Truman was the first one insured under Medicare. And if you just take a peek, you will see that the vice president is an elderly statesman from Minnesota. How interesting. So Medicare made a huge difference. Now, people could get access and take advantage of all of this life-saving technology. From a doctor's point of view, I remember one of my uncles saying, it's like I have a printing press in my office, printing money. So Medicare had a fee schedule, but doctors could still see patients and send the bill to Medicare, and Medicare would pay. They were allowed to go back to their patients and ask the patients to contribute if they didn't get full payment from Medicare. So as we look at the healthcare system, there's really a sharp divide between what happened before Medicare and what happened after Medicare. Now, Medicare trusted that doctors would behave ethically. They would submit reasonable and customary costs. But, there are bad eggs everywhere, right? So, 5 years after Medicare was launched, the Congress held a committee meeting to talk about Medicare fraud. So everyone knew that there was that potential, but still it was kind of the honor system. They trusted doctors to do their thing. Then during the 70s and 80s, there was this huge era of expansion. We took on really bold things. Nixon took on what he called the cancer moonshot. He waged war against cancer. And there was every belief that we would be able to do it because we had been able to impact so many disease processes. And, if you talk with any leaders in oncology today, they will tell you that this war on cancer made a huge impact in the funding for cancer research. So, You just take a look at what happened to healthcare spending, and it kind of makes sense, right? Who doesn't want to get great care? What doctor doesn't want to give their patient the opportunity to have a new health story? What hospital doesn't want to welcome patients in so that they can generate the Medicare revenue and the Blue Cross and Blue Shield revenue that accompanies it? Well, things changed in 1992. Congress took a look at the explosion of healthcare costs and said, look, we cannot afford to do this. So here's what's going to happen. We are going to publish a schedule of what a doctor gets paid for each service. And any doctor who treats Medicare patients must accept this payment as complete payment. They accepted assignment. They didn't go back to their patients and ask for more. Most doctors accepted assignment. Most hospitals accepted assignment and just went with this new plan. And here is the second major point that I want to make. As Medicare goes, so go the Blues. And by the Blues, I mean private health insurance, Blue Cross and Blue Shield. So the Blues looked at Medicare and said, maybe we should not just pay the bills that doctors send us. Let's tell doctors what bills we are going to pay. And this was really the start of the era of managed care. And I have managed care in quotes because this care was neither managed nor offered good care. Now, I was practicing during this time, so I can tell you from my own personal experience what this was like. Conceptually, I can get behind this idea. Doctors have this medical ethic that says that physicians' treatment recommendations should be independent of a patient's ability to pay. So in order to blind ourselves to finances, we just didn't talk about money. I remember one time I had a patient, he had a bad reaction to an antibiotic, but I had just heard about this new antibiotic that avoided the side effect he wanted to avoid. So I prescribed it to him. He came back to me and he said, Dr. Rackner, do you know how much that medication cost? It was over $100. But the truth is, I had no idea how much anything costs. But I started to get curious. And I remember my billing person came into me and she just brought to my attention the amount of money that I got paid from insurance companies for doing an appendectomy. So the way I was paid in private practice is I would see a patient, and then afterwards, I would give them a diagnosis code and then a procedure code. And I would send that to the insurance company. So if the patient needed an operation, I would get paid a certain amount for the entire care of that patient, for the evaluation, for the operation, and then the post-operative care. But my biller pointed out to me that there was just not one price I got for doing a procedure. When I had a Medicaid patient, I got paid approximately $200. If the patient were insured by Blue Cross, I got $1,000. And then I had this one Boeing executive who had like the deluxe insurance plan, and they paid me $2,000. So if a patient were to ask me, how much does it cost to actually get your appendix out? Even when I knew the numbers, I couldn't say. It was sort of like, it depends. And by the way, the amount that the insurance company paid an individual physician was also not set in stone. All of these rates were negotiated. So myself as a surgeon in private practice, I mean, how much negotiating can I do with the insurance companies, right? But if you've got a huge hospital, they can negotiate higher fees. And that's how they can afford to pay their physician employees more and, fund all of the infrastructure that goes along with employing a physician. So there's sort of loosey-goosey ways that doctors get paid. And managed care really gave us the sense that we were paying previously healthcare with unlimited monopoly dollars. And the intent of managed care was to get accountable spending. So, in my lifetime, if my grandfather went into the hospital to get a hernia repair, he was hospitalized for 6 weeks. Well, does somebody with a hernia repair really need to be in the hospital for 6 weeks? And so what happened is that as we looked at the kind of value that we got for healthcare expenditures, we sort of were willing to say, well, what would happen if that hospitalization was 4 weeks or maybe a week? Today, it's day surgery. And, we really don't have high risk of doing it like that. So everyone's on board with this idea of accountable spending. But here's what really happened. I was a resident when this whole thing happened. And suddenly on the hospital floor, there were these new army of employees that I'd never seen before. Their job was to go through the record and make sure that the documentation could support the optimal Medicare compensation. So they would say things like, you've got 2 days left in this hospital stay. Because what happened is, Medicare offered this global fee for surgical patients. And, that included 3 days of hospital stay. And if they had to stay for a fourth, well, the hospital would eat that money. So they had somebody looking at the bottom line, and we hated these people. We hated being told by somebody who has no idea what it means to really treat a patient, what we could or could not do. I remember I was in private practice, and one day I got this letter from the insurance company giving me a grade, like literally an ABCD grade on my effectiveness as a surgeon as compared with my peers. And what that meant was, okay, if I saw a patient with breast cancer, how much did the insurance company pay me versus how much they paid with the group down the hall? So that was kind of jarring to actually get graded. I got the sense that somebody was looking at my performance and deciding whether or not I was a good doctor based on my ability to keep costs down. Now, I remember rounding one night and seeing a patient. I had just removed her spleen. I was thinking, she just needs another day in the hospital. The spleen's right near the stomach. And if the stomach doesn't empty right, then that would put pressure on this bed. And, we didn't want the sutures to break open, right? And have her start bleeding. So in order for that to happen under managed care, I had to get on the phone with their utilization review person. And I said, look, my patient needs to stay in the hospital another day. And you could tell her shuffling through pages because they had scripts. They knew exactly what they needed to ask. And so she asked me, okay, well, what is your plan? Well, I'm going to keep her on the IV another day. What IV fluid and what rate will you administer it? And I could not believe this. This person who may or may not have graduated from high school was interrogating me, a board certified surgeon, about how to take care of patients. This really, really upset doctors. What is going on here? People are telling us what medications to prescribe, how long we can keep patients in the hospital. And I'll tell you what it was like. It was like doctors had been at the helm of the healthcare ship, sort of steering the direction. But suddenly, doctors were told to go back to the servants' quarters. And suddenly the payers, the insurance company, they were at the helm deciding what kind of care patients wanted or didn't want. I remember what it felt like for me was that the foundation of the healthcare system was the doctor-patient relationship. The patient and I were in a room, and together we would make a plan. But with managed care, there was now a third party, and it was the insurance company. And having somebody get in the way of the decisions that doctors and patients make is very intrusive. Before the advent of managed care, about 70 or 80% of physicians were in private practice. But now doctors were being asked to pay attention to the business of medicine. And I wasn't the only unhappy doctor. Many doctors decided they were just going to retire early or go out on disability. Around that time, hospitals across the nation had meetings with doctors with admitting privileges and said, look, there's been a big change. Now you are being expected to really get in the trenches with the business of medicine. You want to see patients. Sell us your practice. We will attend to the business of medicine so you can focus on patient care. This was attractive to many doctors, and they said yes. So by 2000, about half of physicians were in private practice and half were employed by hospitals. Physicians who sold knew that they were trading their autonomy for job security and, quite honestly, better work-life balance. Who wants to be a doctor now? Well, Jordan Belfort, the real Wolf of Wall Street, talks about growing up in a middle-class family. And he said he knew he wanted to be rich. And he thought the best way to get there was to go to dental school. So he gets accepted. First day of dental school, the dean makes an announcement. He says, the golden age of dentistry is over. If you're here to make money, I'm sorry you missed the boat. Try something else. And Jordan Belfort talked about how he literally got up and left the room and went into finance instead. In the meanwhile, there are other things that were happening. When I was in my residency, part of my decision about what residency to choose is what would my call schedule be. So back then, there were programs where surgeons in training would literally spend every other night at the hospital. I went to a program where it was every third night. Now, in the days when doctors really couldn't do much for a patient and make really important decisions, you could sort of understand that. But with the explosion of technology, it required judgment and discernment. There was a woman, a patient by the name of Libby Zion, and she was being managed by this resident who had way too many consecutive sleepless hours. And in his sleepless state, he prescribed a medication that ultimately killed her. So this led to legislation restricting the amount of hours that physicians can work. So what we find is that there's also a shift during this time about who's attracted to the field of medicine, who wants to become a doctor. Now, I'm a boomer, but millennials, people who were looking at healthcare around this time, are much, much different people than boomers. They have different expectations. So their expectation is, well, we might not be millionaires, but we will have some work-life balance. You know, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to be an ER doctor. I know exactly when my shifts are, and then I get to leave and have family time. Well, if my husband and I went to see the movies, we would often go in two cars because if I got called into the emergency room, I needed to be able to take off and go there. So I was really married to medicine. Okay, so what does it mean to be a doctor for me? And these have kind of changed. Well, I took a solemn oath to first do no harm. I took an oath to represent the patient's best interest, to put the patient's needs before my own. So this patient who had her spleen removed, I knew that I was going to be dinged by keeping her another day. But I was willing to do that because my primary concern was her. We needed to respect a patient's autonomy. Like in the 60s, you know, doctors were kind of God. You know, they would keep things from patients. They would say things to a husband like, I don't think your wife is strong enough to really accept a cancer diagnosis, so let's keep it a secret. And doctors felt like they were in the best position to make choices for patients. But with informed consent, we respect a patient's autonomy. A doctor's job is to tell them the risks and benefits of the alternatives, and then the patient is in the best position to make decisions for himself or herself. Now, that's as long as they're competent to really make a decision. There was a patient who came into the breast cancer care. She was a model, and she said to everyone who saw her, I would rather die with both of my breasts than live with just one. That was her decision. We had to send her to a psychiatrist to see if she was really competent to make that kind of decision. And she needed to find the doctors who would support that. But the thing is, we always sensed ourselves to represent the patient's voice. So it's to call the insurance companies if the insurance companies said no to funding a certain procedure and saying, look, this is why this patient needs it. It's to negotiate with relatives who are in the difficult choice of, should I withdraw treatment? So there might be some family members who said, no, you can't do that to mom. And it would be the physician who would have to explain, look, this is what mom really wanted. So all of these things really shaped the kind of care that patients got, the experience of being a doctor. And these things were shifting because of managed care. So the next big change is entering the era of the Affordable Care Act. And where were we then? Okay, we wanted every American to have financial access to healthcare. We had these employer-sponsored plans that insured the majority of Americans, and we had a sort of government-sponsored plan that dealt with the poor and the elderly. The idea of creating this separation, that the government didn't play a role in employer-sponsored healthcare is really disingenuous because the government did really sponsor employment healthcare with tax cuts. So really, the government has played a role in the evolution of our healthcare system. We just don't see it. It's not as obvious. Okay, so we were worried about people who were underemployed or uninsurable because of pre-existing conditions. And this is the problem to which the Affordable Care Act was the solution. Now, we knew that during managed care, there were unhappy doctors. And now we're going to add something else, like which doctor is going to want to stay in healthcare? And I'm so glad personally and professionally that it came to be. But there's always unintended consequences, right? And with the Affordable Care Act, there was this Freedom of Information clause. And what that said is that, look, healthcare should be transparent. Now, we knew how much the federal government spent on Medicare, but what we didn't know up to this point is how much individual physicians were paid. Suddenly, this became public information. And you started looking at this data, and it is very clear that there are outliers. Now, we've got these Medicare costs exploding. Well, maybe there's a whole bunch of fraudulent activity, but what if we could recover that fraudulently paid money? And I know this sounds crazy. I know that you think I'm making this up, but you can Google it yourself. So Medicare decided basically to launch this army of bounty hunters. So there were whistleblowers who could notify Medicare about fraud. If funds were recovered, then the bounty hunter would get a portion of these funds. And there are people who really did the wrong thing. Like, how did they ever get through medical school? So there's this report of this Detroit oncologist who built Medicare for $34 million in fraudulent claims for administering chemotherapy. He actually gave chemotherapy to people who didn't even have cancer, and he killed people. Okay, clearly this is not going to happen. But the thing is, when you take a look at what is the profile of somebody who's going to go to medical school and devote their lives to it, it's generally not this kind of person. Some people will sort of put their toes on the edge. I remember when I was a resident, I was at Children's Hospital, And this pediatric surgeon gave us the heads up at the scrub sink about, the patient coming in for the next day. It was a 2-month old who had a belly button hernia, an umbilical hernia, and he was going to repair it. And, the attending went into the OR, and I just asked the resident, but like, don't those close spontaneously? Like, you're not supposed to be fixing hernias in 2-month-olds. And my resident just sort of chuckled and said, well, he must have an alimony payment. This kind of fraud was very, very, very rare. But all physicians felt like somebody was looking over their shoulder. And I'll tell you, if Medicare accuses you of fraud, you are guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And doing that is a very hard thing. Okay, then we enter the era of COVID. I remember walking my dog. We were walking near the lake, and a huge windstorm that had come the night before had blown a dock from its mooring. And somebody from the city was there, and I asked him, well, what are you going to do about this? He said, I don't know. We've never been here before. And I thought, what a perfect metaphor for COVID. We had never been there before. Yes, there was the Spanish flu of 1918, but this was a different time. And I will tell you that this was an absolute shock for everyone, right? But especially for physicians. So remember, we were in a situation where we didn't know whether the demand for resources would exceed the supply. We knew what happened with PPE. We knew that COVID patients needed to be on ventilators, and would we have enough ventilators? So every time I operated on a patient, that patient was in a ventilator. And what happened was that all across the country, hospitals and practices were saying, look, we need to save lives. We are going to postpone all of our elective cases so that all of our resources can go into treating COVID patients. But these elective cases are the engines that drive profitability of hospitals, individual clinics. And so what happened was that employers, hospital employers like the Mayo Clinic, the single largest employer in the state of Minnesota, announced sweeping pay cuts because they were projecting losses in the billions. So some doctors were put on furlough. Some doctors who traded their autonomy for hospital employment during managed care were suddenly laid off. No doctor ever expected that their income would do anything but go up year after year. And like, this is a real invitation. The American Colleges of Surgeons, which is my professional organization, hosted a webinar, Economic Survival Strategies in the COVID World, where they talked about really, really basic stuff. Here's how to do a budget. Here's how to cut a budget. Here are things that you need to do before you think about filing for bankruptcy, because we had no idea what the future would look like. It was horrifying. All right, so how does the government thank doctors who were risking their lives to treat patients? Well, starting in 2020, Medicare offered physicians a fee cut. And doctors have been asked to take a fee cut every year since 2020, including 2025. Now, here's the thing that you might not be aware of. So, the American College of Surgeons hired lobbyists, right, to not make this go into law. So we were encouraged to write our senators and our representatives, don't pass this legislation. Well, what this means is that basically doctors' fees are legislated, right? And then as Medicare go, so too go the blues. But here's the even weirder part. If you look at how Medicare spending is divided, the amount that is offered to physicians is only a small percentage of total Medicare spending. So if somebody handed this to you and said, okay, figure out a way to cut Medicare spending, I mean, the logical choices are to go after the big areas of spending, hospital, managed care. But that's not what happened. For whatever reason, it's just the physicians who were targeted. And the political cynics say, well, that's because, hospitals and managed care have huge lobbying groups. It's much more difficult for physicians to change the vote of a senator or a representative. So where are we now? Well, let's take a look at the 2023 federal spending. The total spending was about $6 trillion. The amount spent on Medicare was almost a trillion. If you look at that Medicare spending, about 140 billion of that went to physicians. So again, we're dealing with very unhappy physicians. They're unhappy from managed care. They're having sort of PTSD in this post-COVID era. And something else started happening that may or may not be below your radar. In the post-COVID world, corporations like CVS and Amazon and United Healthcare, and also private equity, recently started acquiring physician practices. We are now in what I'm calling the era of corporatization. Now, we've got a 30-year history of healthcare consolidation that dates back to managed care in the early 90s. So hospitals purchased medical practices. Bigger hospitals bought smaller hospitals. And we have some evidence about what the outcomes are. Mounting evidence shows that consolidation has led to higher prices and lower wages. We have little evidence that consolidation improves the quality of care or healthcare outcomes. And this is all very tricky. So the FTC, the DOJ, and state antitrust agency have all played a role in challenging consolidation and other potentially anti-competitive practices. But here is what's new. Now we have new investors in healthcare consolidation. And who are they? Well, they're private equity, they're venture capitalists, they're health plans, and there are large employers. And why are these new players entering the market? Well, the answer is that there's a business opportunity here. Medicare is expected to grow. Every day, about 11,000 Americans reach age 65. So we know that healthcare spending is going to go up. And what if you, as a company, could grab some of those healthcare dollars? You can understand why somebody business-minded would want to get involved with medicine. So today, 7 out of 10 doctors work for somebody other than themselves. And what are the advantages? Well, patients are delivered to them. They don't have to worry about where their next patient is coming from. They can focus on patient care and let others take care of the business side of medicine. They have a steady income and they have work-life balance. So what might this look like with the corporatization of American healthcare? Well, it's uncertain, but let's take a look at a different chapter where family farms were replaced by corporate farms. This resulted in a whole mind shift. So in corporate farming, food is merely a commodity that can be controlled and monetized for economic good, versus the family farmer who says food represents a public good that everyone has a basic human right to access. So if we substituted healthcare for food, here's what the sentences might look like. Healthcare is merely a commodity that can be controlled and monetized for economic gain, versus healthcare represents a public good that everyone has a basic human right to access. Those opposed to corporate farming say U.S. corporate industrial farming consistently seeks to maximize profit with little or no consideration for agriculture's impact on animals, the environment, and the people who produce and consume our food. And we run the risk of saying something like U.S. corporate healthcare consistently seeks to maximize profit with little or no consideration for the healthcare providers, patients, or the doctor-patient relationship. But there is another possibility, and that is that maybe corporatization is just the force we need to write healthcare. I can go on Amazon and I can order tissues, I can see what my choices are, and I can get it delivered to my home the next day. If there's a problem with the supply, Amazon will let me know. And when they make a promise to me that a package is going to be here on a certain day, I pretty much believe that. Compare that to the story that I heard from a woman who faced a Medicare glitch and called Medicare to get it straightened out. She said that she was greeted with a phone message that said, "Thank you for calling Social Security. Because of staffing shortages, we will respond to you in 100 to 200 days." Amazon would never say that to its customer because here's the reality. The US has the most expensive healthcare in the world. We pay more per capita for healthcare than any other industrialized nation. Yet, if you look at the quality of healthcare, the healthcare outcomes, the United States is at the bottom of the list. This is the problem that needs to be fixed. We need to get better outcomes. We need to be smarter about how we spend healthcare dollars. And I would argue that what everyone wants when they are a patient is they want to get back to the art of medicine too, about the importance of this relationship. I'm new in town and I was asking my neighbors, do you have a veterinarian that you could recommend? I found that most of the veterinarians were booked out for 2-3 months. One of my neighbors said, well, I just take my dog into urgent care. You can get in quickly and they can help you with pretty much whatever problem that you have. And if we want to make healthcare just a commodity, that's one thing. But for me, it's not a good solution. I want to know my veterinarian. I want my veterinarian to know my animals because sometimes we have to make judgment calls. What's really the right thing to do? And they're in the best position to make their recommendations when we have continuity of care, when they know me, when they know my animal. So I love the play Hamilton, and the second act opens up with the song What I Miss. And in the song, Madison turns to Jefferson and says, Thomas, we are engaged in a battle for our nation's very soul. Can you get us out of the mess we're in? And I know that this sounds dramatic, but I think we're asking a very similar question. Our nation needs to be healthy. And what's important to us? What are our priorities for healthcare? What do we value? Who should steer the ship? And who guards the hen house? So this is a challenging time for physicians. And as you're dealing with individual clients, here's probably what your physician prospects and clients want. They want agency. They want to have control over the destiny of their lives. They want to get back to both the art of medicine and the science of medicine. They want just two parties in the doctor-patient relationship. They want control over their financial destiny. In short, physicians want to practice medicine and live their lives on their own terms. What does this mean to you? Well, many physicians are thinking, well, how can I retire early? What are my options here? So they want and need to create financial certainty. For you to be successful, what this means is that you are probably a best fit with a certain group of doctors. Maybe your products and services make more sense for employed physicians or physicians who still have an ownership stake in the practice. So don't try to be all things to all people. Focus on a group of doctors strategically. Now, you already offer financial leadership, but you may consider adding life leadership to your value proposition so you can help create the lives that physicians want. You might say, but Dr. Vicki, I don't know how to do this. Well, my third book about doctors and money, How Doctors Build True Wealth, is coming out. And true wealth is like the flip side of the coin of burnout. So if you've ever played with an Etch-a-Sketch, you know that there are only two wheels. And just by adjusting these two wheels, you can draw the Taj Mahal with an Etch-a-Sketch. Well, each one of us has two things that we too can tweak, our time and our money. And in the true wealth way, I show physicians how to proactively manage their time and money so that they can have a satisfied life, a rich life in which they don't have to worry about how they pay their monthly expenses, and a wealthy life, which is a collection of rich months, even when earned income ends. There is a path. There are a series of stages that you go through on your way to true wealth. And so now you will have a system available that can help your doctors get to true wealth. I am here. I am happy to continue this conversation. Again, I so appreciate your dedication to serving the physicians who serve the community. You are important. I know that this is hard, but I am here. I've got your back. Every single product or service I've developed, it's because some financial advisor has come to me and said, look, I can use some help with this. So I am here for you. Thank you again and have a great day. Bye-bye, everyone.